The following is a conversation with John Warner IV, the son of retired Senator John Warner III, former Secretary of the Navy and Chairman of the Armed Services Committee, and also a Knight of the British Empire. John Warner's mother is Catherine Mellon, banking heiress and daughter of philanthropist Paul Mellon, who was also a Knight of the British Empire and a member of the Office for Strategic Services, or OSS. John Warner is also the third cousin to the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence Christopher Mellon, and he says that growing up in a family that had a seat at many of the most historically significant tables led to his insatiable quest to find and reveal hidden truths behind world events. An avid researcher of revisionist or alternative history, Warner began writing this book series during a 2-year-long recovery from a racing car accident. His extensive research for Little Anton evolved into a gripping historical narrative that reveals hidden truths about technological advancements and prominent leaders active in the World War II era, including Adolf Hitler, Heinrich Himmler, Ferdinand Porsche, and Winston Churchill. Part love story and part satire, the book centers on Hitler's use of Porsche's brilliant engineering mind to build the world's fastest machines, and the occultism of the SS to further new advanced weapons of the Wunderwaffe. John and his wife Tabor split their time between their Washington, D.C. area residence and their Virginia farm, where he is finishing the sequel to Little Anton, titled Lion, Tiger, Bear. In this discussion, John and I dive into his family history, their connections to esoteric societies as well as the US intelligence community, and of course John's book Little Anton and the inspiration behind its creation. I hope you enjoy this conversation between myself and John Warner IV. There is a myriad of topics I want to get into, but let's kick this off with you giving everyone listening just a bit of an introduction about your own life and some of your family history, because you come from a very unique background. And although me and my colleagues, Jean-Luc and John Majerowski, have done a 3-part series on your book, Little Anton, I think it would be a good idea to hear from yourself just about your own personal life journey and the family background that you come from, if that's all right with you.
Sure. Don't want to bore everyone, but yeah, you know, when I was a kid, I just took it for granted. And in my later life, it's like, wow, I've had a really strange life. You know, when I was a kid, I was just, really didn't, I was born into a wealthy family, but my dad was, and my uncle were, and my grandmother, Granny Warner, they were middle-class people. They didn't come from great wealth. My mother's family did. So, I was sort of raised in a dichotomy of, my mother was kind of a hippie type. It was the 1960s and everything. And, I remember her watching the original Star Trek when I was 4 years old when it premiered with her. And my dad came in and he's like, what's this garbage on? Oh my God, he called it the idiot box. What are you watching this on the idiot box for? He was hilarious. And mom would tell him to shut the hell up. And so I had an interesting upbringing. I had 2 older sisters and all their friends. And so that's why I write about B in my book. It's kind of loosely based on my sisters and all their really funny friends that I grew up with. But I was just terrible student. My dad and they sent me to the National Cathedral schools up here in DC, and I could see the cathedral from here. And they thought, oh, that's a great idea. And all my friends from grade school up there, they went, and I was like, oh, great, I could play. In those days, in 1972, at 10 years old or 9 years old, you could play tackle football, which I thought was great. I was the worst football player in St. Almo's history, but I thought it was great. And so it was different times. But it was a very religious school. We had to go to chapel every morning. And I was like, what? This is the most boring shit I could ever imagine. And so at 10 years old, I looked at my Jewish friends, and everyone was doing skullduggery in chapel, trading football cards or, this, that, and the other. I think I was selling candy bars. There was a black market.
That was the same in my school as well. I think everyone's got one of those people that's selling candy and sweets and stuff in school.
My best friend tells me, he sat right next to me for years. His father was the Bishop of Washington. He's he was the first black bishop of Washington. And he was a goody two shoes, and I was always the bad boy. And my desk was full of, Hot Rod magazine, Playboy, candy wrappers, Star Trek memorabilia, things like that. Everything but my books and homework.
Right.
But they came down on me. I stopped believing in God and praying. Then I was just like, this is really boring, and I don't get it. And they threatened. This was a church school, Episcopalian school, and they threatened me like how dare you think for yourself? And I was like, wow, at least I can
Not
think.
A fun environment, especially for a free
thinker.
And,
I got it all. God hates you, John Warner, and
wow.
Jesus is going to kick your ass. All this stuff, and I'm like, gosh, they don't sound like people I want to hang out with. He just sounds like a used car salesman. That didn't go over well. I said that in class. And, I spent a good portion of my time in the principal's office. It was the 70s. Everyone was pretty rebellious, but, my sisters and I were, and my father's working as Secretary of the Navy. So I'm literally, when my parents divorced, I was a little kid in the Pentagon doing my homework after school. And so I remember the Vietnam War very well. All the admirals and people, I remember that. I wandered the halls of the Pentagon. And my best friend, who's a federal judge now here in DC, we got arrested one time in the Pentagon. I think we were like 11, 12. And we ended up in the war room. They assigned an ensign to us, better escort these two idiots. And so we ended up in the war room with all the computers and the big board and everything. And an admiral comes in and says, what the hell are these kids doing in here? And had the MPs arrest us. And we had done some other things unsavory. And so we got arrested. Those were the kind of fun, interesting things that I grew up with Dad. And the great thing about Dad was, because my parents were divorced and I didn't see my mom that much in the 70s, he took me everywhere with him, which was, my dad, that was the smartest thing he ever did. And he knew I was interested in the military and the Navy. And every naval base, almost all of them in the world. I haven't been to Diego Garcia or some of the other more esoteric ones, but the big ones, I went to all of them. I literally grew up carrying his briefcase everywhere. And so, it was just a part of my life. I thought, this is normal and everything. And I really enjoyed it. But later on in my life, meeting all those people, they remembered me as a boy. And of course, they were good friends with Dad. And, my dad's a great guy and he's really funny and everyone likes him. He has a great record. But, I had this strange upbringing. And of course, when he married Elizabeth Taylor, everything went haywire. But she was a very interesting, down-to-earth person. She believed in extraterrestrials and UFOs and all that stuff. And so she and I would talk about that at the table when I was like 16,
Right.
And, she was a very interesting person. So my life has been full of interesting people. I've met all kinds of people everywhere. And, I didn't think it was any real big deal. But, later on in life, people were amazed that I just had this interesting upbringing.
Well, it's definitely a unique thing to be a kid walking through the halls of the Pentagon, getting in trouble for being in the war room and things like that. It's not everyone can claim that kind of background.
Yeah, the Navy and Marines, they fed and clothed me,
right?
So to speak. I went everywhere, and I really appreciated it. I still love the Navy and Marines, not the black programs, that are run by, fascist-minded people. I don't like those people, but those people change uniforms all the time. So are they Navy? Are they Army? Are they Air Force or Space Force? Yeah. But, growing up with all that, meeting all those senators, I knew them all. John Glenn and, you name a senator. I really was interested in all that. I didn't like politics. Right around my late 20s, early 30s, I said, Dad, what kind of bullshit's going on Capitol Hill? They can't seem to get anything done. And I was really trying to figure things out. And, we were talking about CNN. This is one of my dad's so funny. He doesn't try to be, but he is. And I said, my God, they're telling us lies on CNN. And, the admiral the other day, we were talking about this and it's bullshit. We shouldn't be in Afghanistan or whatever. And he said, oh, for God's sake, son, that's their job. Like, lie, because he was pissed as hell because they said something bad about him. They were, those lecherous pirates, And And so it was really funny, but that's when I started to figure out that the press really was full of shit.
Yeah.
I mean, all of it. And I thought, maybe this will be better than the next. And over time, no. And it was my dad who really kind of are going back and forth that I really realized that things were not as they seem. Our entire reality is not what we think it is.
Well, this kind of gets into sticking kind of with your family history, but into the more esoteric part of this. Now, I've got to admit that when it comes to esoteric knowledge, secret societies, the work of people like Carl Jung, my colleagues Jean-Luc and John Majorowski are far more knowledgeable than myself. I'm in the process of kind of dipping my toes into this area of study at the moment, but I'd love to unpack some of this family history, especially with your grandfather, Paul Mellon, his wife, Mary, and their connections to world famous psychiatrist and psychoanalyst Carl Jung. Can you just give us a bit of background on your family's involvement with Carl Jung? Because this is a fascinating bit of history.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on Jung, but I've read several of his books, and I never was interested in that so much growing up. I was more of a military historian guy. But my grandfather and I would talk. He'd get away from his wife and a couple martinis in him, and he was surprisingly, he got along me, not necessarily was comfortable with women. I think that's my impression. But I talked about his stint in World War II, and I always knew that Mary Mellon, she was a mystic, but I never really understood that in the old days. It wasn't until like 20 years ago I started dipping my toes into the occult, mysticism, and secret societies and hidden knowledge. And then I was like, holy cow, Mary was on it. She was a badass. I give my grandmother complete credit. My grandfather was this very conservative, very quiet, soft-spoken guy. And by all accounts, I mean, Mary died in 1947. She wasn't. She was very vivacious and outgoing, kind of like my mom. And Mary had been into mysticism, and she got to know Carl Jung. I think George Gurdjieff, she followed him. I can't remember if she met him or he was dead by her time. But she certainly was into all of that. And my grandfather, she kind of pulled my grandfather into that. And the story I got from him was that they went to see Carl Jung because she had terrible asthma, and it was triggered by stress and other things. But that wasn't the only thing they talked about. They talked about everything. And he said, your grandmother was into, Annie Besant and Madame Blavatsky and Rudolf Steiner and all of, the bigwigs of the Theosophists.
Yeah.
And they were all into Atlantis and, Lord Bulwer Lytton's novel, The Coming Race, and The Thrill.
I've ordered that, and it's now arrived, so I'm going to read it. It's a surprisingly thin book. I thought it would be a lot bigger, but it's just a little tiny novel.
Well, the Theosophist Society of London declared it a book of absolute truth, I think, sometime in the early 20th century. And so she was into all that, the Atlantis lore and everything, So I've really, the last 20 years, I've had to play really fast catch up to her. And I don't have a lot of her diaries or things that she wrote to read. My mother has a few letters that I've read and everything, but she was really smart. And so she kind of probably opened up my grandfather to a lot of those esoteric concepts, which is probably why in World War II, he got to know Carl Jung. And when he was a U.S. Army cavalry officer in Fort Riley, Kansas, I think it was Mary's sort of, leanings that inspired him to go into the OSS. They were looking for very wealthy, well-traveled, Yale-educated, Harvard, Princeton types, because they were going to be dealing with the Nazi intelligence, the Abwehr and the Ostfront and the Gehlen, intelligence services. They needed the best minds they could. And in those days, they thought, well, the most educated, well-rounded people who have traveled the world, they can probably do it better. That's why the OSS got Julia Child and, Mo Berg is my favorite, the Red Sox catcher. There's a movie about him. So, I think Jung was a big part of Mary Mellon's life. And reading, Jung wrote a book called Flying Saucers, which I think is kind of disinformation because, that gets into Carl Jung being the story I hear is that he was a consultant to MJ12 Group, after the World War II.
How did you find that out, if I can ask that?
I've read about it from several sources. It makes sense to me because they brought in, Alan Dulles was station chief of Switzerland.
Right.
And so Alan Dulles and my grandfather were good friends. Yeah, be careful who you befriend in the war, But the Dulles brothers, their law firm of Sullivan and Cromwell, my great-grandfather, Andrew Mellon, the Mellons had been using them, Wall Street, skullduggery, robber baron stuff. That was the law firm to go to. They were like, oh, invest in Nazi Germany over here. Oh, Adolf Hitler seems like our kind of guy. He's a Republican, isn't he? And that's what they thought, But Andrew Mellon was Secretary of the Treasury. He was also the ambassador to England in 1931. He and his oligarch buddies, they were involved with their outdated policies. And I think it's very suspicious and suspect stuff going on before and after the Great Depression hit. And I think a lot of people blame him and Rockefeller and Carnegie and all the others for that. And of course, as you know, when you crash markets and then you bring them back up again, you make money on both sides.
Yeah, of course.
So, the Mellon fortune, all four Mellon brothers, it's all wrapped up in that kind of, seedy business.
Now, you've said a number of times, I'm going to jump into the deep end a little bit here, that your family is one of the 13 families of the real Illuminati, and that no, Committee of 300.
Yes.
Right.
So here's what because growing up, I've never heard of the Illuminati. I've never even heard of the Committee of 300, or, I never even heard that even in polite society. So what it is the 13 royal families of Europe. They're loosely connected to the Black Venetian royalty and other bloodlines, but the conspiracy is that those families rule even in secret. They said, oh, kings and queens, they don't have any money anymore. The royals don't rule. No, that's not my impression. I've met a lot of these people over the years with my dad, and I've been to Buckingham Palace. I've met the Queen 3 times. What is so interesting about us Mellons? It's because my grandfather and the Queen were very good friends. They had the horse racing hobby in common, but it was a lot more than that. And when I first read about all the 13 families sort of controlling the Committee of 300 families of America, I thought that was a crock of shit. I never heard any of that. It's certainly not, you're not given a handbook in these big families. Here it is, here's the scoop, they don't do that. I mean, I've never heard of any of this stuff. I learned it like everyone else did on my own.
Right. And well, that's something I wanted to bring up real quick, because I think it's important for people to understand whether or not this is information you've come across via public research or information through, kind of special networks within your family. So the Committee of 300, 13 families, that's something that you found through public research.
Absolutely.
Right.
I didn't, other than my grandfather's stories and some other Mellons that I've talked to about certain issues, but all the esoteric stuff and none of that came from the Mellon family. But of course, they're in it now, Chris Mellon. So, I had to learn it on my own. Here's what I've learned over the years, and it took me a while to piece it together. But when I was at the University of Virginia, another friend of mine he's from one of these Committee of 300 families. Illuminati is a catch-all term. People bandy it about. It really only refers to the Bavarian Illuminati of Germany.
Right, yeah.
It's a loose term that, throw all the rich, bad people in a pile and, they're the Illuminati. Like I said, I've never even heard of it outside of the historical context until people started misusing it, I think. Because I'm a historian, and so when I read all about Adam Weishaupt and the Bavarian Illuminati, it's just, somebody came up with that as just an easy way to describe the complex factions of our world, the elite factions. But these elite factions are more elite than you think. When I was at the University of Virginia, my friend and I, we were, wild boys. We weren't into all that, coat and tie stuff. But there was a fraternity that was, very conservative, coats and ties, Republicans. And I went there, and these guys were very strange, and I didn't want to wear a coat and tie. I hate wearing a coat and tie. I'm a jean and t-shirt guy, even today. And so my friends stayed and partied with them for a while and everything. And I never thought anything about it. And then I've heard of these secret societies at UVA. One's called the Seven Society and one's called IMP. And I think there's another couple of those. And no one knows the members. The only way you know who a member was, it's on their gravestones. And so you look them up on the internet and they say, oh, we're this beneficial society for, the cultural arts or something highbrow, hi-hat, some of that bullshit. And so I started drilling down on secret societies. Okay, I think, I figured it out. And where they tap these usually just young boys, college men, whatever you want to call them, some women, but I think it's mostly men because it's patriarchal. And so, at Yale, it's Skull and Bones, and my grandfather, Paul Mellon, was a Scroll and Key, which is linked to the Tula Society of Germany.
Right.
Do the math on that one. But I think you join a conservative-minded fraternity, and then you have another party, and they're like, oh, let me introduce you to some faculty and other people, whoever they are, the alumni, big alumni. And then probably some of these kids are like, yeah, Adolf Hitler's not that bad of a guy. And, I'm into, big military and, screw everybody. And they're like, oh, that's interesting. And then, you go to another party and they tap you on the shoulder, like, would you like to be part of an exclusive club? But, they're like, fuck yeah, but that takes a certain mindset. And, when you're in these, secret societies, not a fraternity, but a secret society, you're in it for the long haul, whether you like it or not. I believe they're blackmailed. If some kid, has gone through some strange rituals and all these things and says, well, I don't want to be in Skull and Bones or the Seven Society or whatever it is, they're like, no, you can't leave. And they're like, and so to blackmail someone, as it's pretty easy. Put a Mickey in their drink, and they pass out, and you put them in compromising positions, and you take photographs. And that's been done for the last 160 years, as long as we've had photographs. I guess in the old days, they did it with witnesses, but, this is part of our world, and it goes on up into these bigger organizations, like the Bohemian Grove, which I believe is a big, giant blackmail club. And I know people that have gone there, and it actually breaks my heart because I think they're into all kind of satanic magic. I mean, the giant owl, the Bohemian Club in California, that's indicative of Hecate, Catherine of the Wheel, Inanna. These are, Anunnaki gods. And they're not nice people. I mean, that's, they're doing Moloch rituals and Babylon workings and, Enochian magic. And that took me years to figure out, years and years, because that's complicated, disturbing, weird history. But, everyone sees that giant owl that, knows what they're up to. And I think, part of the blackmail at the Bohemian Grove Club, I think that has to do with pedophilia.
Well, it's one of those things where the kind of tangible public surface level evidence for things like this in terms of blackmail rings that involve that type of compromising material is Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, he has been shown, and I think it was Eric Weinstein, who I love listening to, who said that when it comes to the Jeffrey Epstein issue, we've tripped over an enormous structure that we don't fully understand here, that he's just this little part of a much bigger structure. And I think that's the first time that within the mainstream people have been given a glimpse into a very unsavory world that does actually happen to include high-level intelligence, because it was, he's been linked to intelligence communities. He was shaking hands and working through high society. Pretty much everyone who's worth knowing he knew and interacted with. And so, it seems like people like that are the first kind of signals out to the mainstream that, hey, there is actually something going on here when it comes to blackmailing, and especially when it comes to, unfortunately, child trafficking and that really unsavory world.
Yeah, I mean, I've had discussions with my father over the decades, and I'm like, sometime in the early 2000s after 9/11, when I really started probing the photographs of the Pentagon, I'm a pilot, and so there was no wing debris and no indentations in the structure, no jet engines, and really started to be suspicious of my father. And I said, listen, man, something bad's going on here. This doesn't make sense. There's cameras all over DC and there's no footage of this thing other than a vague explosion, which, I've worked in the film and TV industry, and that's easy to replicate using 3D animation. And you better believe they can use that even back in the day. So I started asking uncomfortable questions. And so, he did agree with me that politicians are, bought and paid for. And that's why he aligned himself with the Navy and the Marines, because being Secretary of the Navy, he had made all those connections and friendships. And he knew he didn't want to be associated with special interests. People can debate that. My father's a politician with a public record, but from my knowledge, that's why because that's a solid foundation to back, they've got your back.
Right. Yeah.
And so, but let me preface that by the military industrial complex, the intelligence community, the corporate, black project world, everything. It's highly compartmentalized and highly factionalized. I'll bet there's hundreds of factions now, if not thousands. So when people say, oh, the Pentagon's lying about this, that, and the other, it's like, well, which factions are lying?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
This dovetails into Chris Mellon. He represents a certain number of factions. And I'm sure there's a lot more factions that hate his guts, and like to see him and Elizondo, their heads on pikes, So it's very complicated. But, my dad and I did, at least he agrees, like, yeah, everyone's bought and paid for by something.
Circling back to your dad and also your grandfather, one thing that I find to be quite interesting, especially because I'm a British citizen, is the fact that your dad, former Senator and Secretary of the Navy, John Warner III, and your grandfather, Paul Mellon, are both Knights of the British Empire, which is one of the highest honors that one can receive from the British royal family. And I find that really interesting. Can you talk about your family's connection to the Windsors, especially when it comes to your grandfather, Paul Mellon, and Queen Elizabeth II?
Yeah. It goes back to Andrew Mellon being ambassador to the court of St. James in 1931. He was good friends with the royal family, by all accounts. Andrew Mellon died in 1937, so my mother was 1 year old, so no one remembers him. But from my talks with my grandfather, I get a pretty, he was a pretty sober, grim chap. But the Mellons are Protestant Irish, so that strikes me as strange because, the British monarchy and all the British aristocracy, I've met a lot of these people over the years. They don't like Irish people. I don't care what they say. And they certainly don't like colonial Americans. They call us colonials. I've been to those houses and those gatherings. I mean, they're very high on their horse. I'm not saying they're all, they're all assholes. I'm sure there's some good ones too, but the ones I've seen, they're very high on the horse. They think the whole world is beneath them. They really do. And so I find that fascinating that an Irishman such as, Andrew Mellon. And so my grandfather, Paul Mellon, was introduced to the royal family when he went to Europe on trips with his father. And I sent you that photo of Andrew Mellon with Amelia Earhart. She knew my Mary Mellon and my grandfather too. It was a small, chummy world of rich folks. And so, at some point during World War II, Paul's brother-in-law, David K.E. Bruce, was station chief in London. And so, they would go to the Savoy Hotel, and mingle with the royals. And, Queen Elizabeth was a mechanic in those days. I thought that was kind of interesting. And so it was a small, chummy world. Are there bloodlines in common? I can't find any Mellons with any kind of royal connection. Actually, on my father's side, we're Stuart from Peterhead, Scotland. So that's interesting. So it's a little hazy as to when, but certainly after World War II, Paul and Queen Elizabeth were definitely chummy. She would come to visit him at his farm in Virginia. He had a huge farm and with its own jet strip. And, before that he had a C-47 Goonie bird. And by all accounts, other members of the royal family stayed with Paul, and he was a dutiful minion of the royal family. When I went to Buckingham Palace with my dad, I always got a creepy feeling, and I'm not saying they're all, negative people. I'm sure they're not, but it didn't sit well with me. And I don't do well with authority. I don't bow down to anyone. I recommend to your viewers and fans, everyone should feel empowered and stand in their power and not be beholden to some group or, a messiah of some sort, or, I don't bow down to any, higher power. All the truth of the universe is within us. It's just in your aura, in your soul. I mean, everyone's like looking for evidence and the truth of it. Well, there's no evidence of anything really in our reality. You can't even prove we exist beyond a shadow of a doubt. So I'm getting ahead of myself, but as far as the royal family, yeah. I mean, I sent you that article in the 90s. Paul Mellon was, the Virginia Hunt Country ambassador to the Windsors. I mean, it was no secret or anything. But what people don't know is that directors of Central Intelligence and presidents would meet with Paul at his farm in secret. Ever since World War II. I know Ike was there. My mother remembers seeing Ike. Wow. And, that's not public. And I've been told by my intelligence community friends, they're like, oh yeah, the Mellons come up in the CIA all the time. Richard Mellon Scaife, I think, Mellon Scaife, he supposedly had a black slush fund for the CIA in the 50s. I'm sure my grandfather did too, because Alan Dulles tapped him on the shoulder. Hey man, we got to go to the CFR meeting. And they were in the Jason Society, the Trilateral Commission. And the bottom line about Paul Mellon is, if you're a member of those societies and one of your good buds is Alan Dulles, who's involved in the Kennedy assassination, you don't care about the people of the world. You only care about your kind. And that's the impression I've gotten from meeting all these people all my life is, these people that look down on others, I don't like them. I don't feel any kinship with them. I've never have.
Speaking of the CIA, was it your great-grandfather, Andrew Mellon, that was integral in the establishment of the Office of Strategic Services, or the OSS?
No, Wild Bill Donovan was a friend of my grandfather's. They would fox hunt together with General Patton and General Marshall in Middleburg, Virginia, which is a big horse fox hunting capital. And so I have a picture of Patton and General Marshall, together that my grandfather took one day. And no, as far as I know, Donovan cobbled up the OSS, but it's still shrouded in mystery. But they only tapped Paul Mellon to join. He wasn't one of the founding members or anything, to my knowledge. Was he? Maybe. They certainly, were probably very interested in Mary Mellon and her mystical, that's how Carl Jung got involved with the OSS, was through Mary Mellon and my grandfather. They were like, hey, we got this great organization with Wild Bill Donovan. He was the real kind of Indiana Jones kind of guy, not the rest of them really. Mo Berg too. But, my grandfather was a very meek kind of guy. He wasn't the wild man that I am or somebody like that. He was a very reserved man.
And it was your grandfather that you and your father, John Warner, have made numerous Freedom of Information Act requests to the CIA, right, in order to gain access to his files. Am I right in saying that these files were in the ballpark of like 10,000 pages or something like that?
Yes, that's what I've been told. I mean, my wife used to work for the CIA, and she's like, oh, well, the Mellon name comes around all the time. My uncle Tim Mellon, my mother's brother, he owns Pan Am Systems, which is the old Pan Am Airlines. And he hauls freight in New England on his railroad. And I know for a fact that he hauls classified cargo for the intel community. So there's been 40 Mellons since World War II, I've been told. I don't have all their names, that have been in the intelligence business. Now, Stephen Greer, told me, and I believe him, the Mellons are the first family of intelligence. That's what he calls them. He's correct. I met with him years ago here in DC, and my wife and I. And because in 2010, one of his podcasts, he's like, oh, Senator John Warner was a magic member. I was like, holy shit.
Yeah, I remember you saying that in an interview, yeah.
Yeah, majority for Joint Intelligence Committee, which doesn't officially exist. It's a liaison to the whatever Majestic 12 calls themselves, PI 40 or some other name, and he sat on the Select Intel Committee, as well as being chairman of the Armed Services. So he won't talk to me about any of that stuff, but I know he was on it, and I suspect he was a magic member. I do, but I've gotten away from your question. I'm sorry.
No, don't worry about it. I was going to ask as well. Did your grandfather? Did your grandfather Paul ever tell you anything that would connect him to the UFO issue?
Yes, he did. Although at the time I thought nothing of it. When I was in college, I was taking Russian history and military history as a major, and so I was going to go in that field at graduate school, but I didn't. And he was interested. I was interested in talking with him about World War II. And we would have they weren't many, but we had a few man-to-man conversations. After 2 or 3 of his martinis, man, he would loosen up a bit. And he gave me one day as a present this letter from General Patton that said, hey, Paul, it was great to work with you during the war. We had a lot of fun in Czechoslovakia together. And, let's fox hunt and do all that fun stuff. And so this was probably around 1985. I was probably 24 years old, 23. And I said, well, what were you doing? What was the OSS and you doing in Czechoslovakia? And he said, well, I was attached with Patton's Third Army in 1945. Well, where was Patton? Well, Ike told Patton, Patton wanted to go to Berlin. But Ike told him, no, you need to do something more important. You need to go and secure Pilsen in Czechoslovakia. And he said, well, I'll do better than that. I'm going to go on to Prague. And they said, no. And the story is, and I got it from Joseph P. Farrell, and I believe it because it jibes with my grandfather's story, is that the Yalta Conference, they promised Prague and that half of Czechoslovakia to the Soviets, to Stalin, as a deal. And that's the way, these things work. And so I said, well, what were you doing? And he didn't, my grandfather wouldn't name the town, but I'm pretty sure it's Pilsen. And what was in Pilsen? Well, we know now through Nick Cook's book. And then when I read that book, I was like, oh shit, this is getting really weird for me. And I probably read that for the first time 16 years ago. And that's where General SS Hans Kammler was in charge of the SSE-4 technology division, the Wunderwaffe. And, rockets, chemical lasers at IG Farben, transistors. Oh, yeah. They had them during the war. And, atomic program, they would distill isotopes using a chemical laser. That's what it's for. I don't believe the stories that the laser was invented elsewhere. No, the Germans did it. It all makes sense to me with everything I know. And Walter Gerlach and nonlinear German physics and all that stuff, and the rumors of the Nazi bell and anti-gravity experiments and whatever they were doing with it. And so I didn't know that then, but my grandfather said, oh, I went to a German hangar or warehouse and I was with Patton, and I think he said General Marshall, but I can't place Marshall there at the time. But I knew he was with Bruce and probably Alan Dulles, but he didn't say that. And he said, we saw all kinds of exotic, German weapons in production, rockets and everything. He said, I saw a disc-shaped aircraft. And I said, ooh, is that the one powered by all the BMW jet engines? The Arado ones, and BMW made them in a circle that didn't really work. And I'll never forget it. And he laughed and he said, no.
Ooh.
And at the time, I thought nothing of it. I thought, that's cool.
Yeah.
And it wasn't years later when I read Nick Cook's book that, that shiver went down my spine.
Kind of connected those dots and was, yeah.
Yeah. And so, it didn't give me a warm, fuzzy feeling because, Hans Kammler was in charge of building all the death camps, and he came up with the idea of using slave labor. That's why he's, basically not in the history books. We're taught about, Mengele and, all the other bad guys and stuff. Not Hans Kammler. He was the man, and I put him in my second book. I'm writing about it now. But in my third book, I'll touch on Hans Kammler a lot more. But I didn't start piecing all this together until 15 years ago. And I started asking him around quietly about the Mellons. And people were like, I've made a lot of friends, contacts in DC, both in the intel community, the military community. And they were like, oh yeah, the Mellons, your family's been involved in this, that, and the other. And I'm like, why didn't I know about this or hear about this? And like, well, you didn't hear it from me, but I was surprised how many senators and congressmen that I've known over the decades and military people were so forthcoming. And I think they knew people wouldn't believe me, or, I was my father's son. They loved my dad. And I just said, don't quote me, or you're not a writer, are you? And I was like, no, I'm just a racing driver. Don't worry about this idiot. They didn't worry about it. But I knew Bobby Ray Inman. I mean, I remember him from my days as a youth in the Pentagon when my dad was Secretary of the Navy. Later on, I found out, and I believe it, that he was MJ1 in the 90s of the Majestic 12 group. And that makes perfect sense to me. I mean, I remember asking him, do we have UFOs in the military? He's like, oh, sure. But not much beyond that.
Well, he's a very prominent figure. I mean, Admiral Bobby Ray Inman is, especially within the UFO community, I mean, he was a close confidant of George Bush and a man who was well acquainted with sites such as the Groom Lake Complex, or, what people know as Area 51. I think he was director of both Naval Intelligence and the NSA, as well as deputy director of the DIA, CIA. One thing that I love about that is he was once asked by a reporter, I think his name was Bob Exler, if he believed any of the recovered UFO vehicles in possession of the US military would ever become available. There's a video of this as well, with him on record talking. And, this guy's asking if these things will ever become available for public technological research.
In a telephone conversation with Bob Exler in 1989, he referred to recovered vehicles becoming available for research.
Do you anticipate that any of the recovered vehicles would ever become available for technological research outside of the military circles?
Again, I honestly don't know. 10 years ago, the answer would have been no.
Yeah.
Whether as time has evolved, they're beginning to become more open on it, is a possibility.
That statement alone would indicate that Admiral Bobby Ray Inman was aware of the existence of retrieved vehicles of non-terrestrial origin. And he was also, when he retired from government service in 1982, he went on to become the president of Science Applications International Corporation, SAIC, which, one of the massive companies that was one of its main areas was gravitational propulsion research and all this. So he's like a prime candidate for MJ1, as you said.
Oh yeah, it makes perfect sense. And, it's that world, back in the 90s, that was no big deal to knock on doors. I think Stephen Greer and Richard Dolan and others were really trying to get some scoop, and they got a lot of good information. And I sort of kept dabbling in the UFO field a little bit. But what was interesting is in 1993, I'm backtracking here.
Yeah, no worries.
I was racing in California at Sears Point, and one of my teammates said, "Oh, I know your."
I was going to ask you about dad. This. Yeah, this is a good story.
And I meet people all the time. They're like, "Oh, I know your dad. He's a great guy." And I said, "Oh, really?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, my dad used to work in the aerospace field." And I said, "Oh, for who?" And he's like, Lockheed Martin, you name it, Boeing Defense, everything. And I said, "Oh, that's interesting." They're the ones working on all the UFO stuff, But my knowledge was scant back then. This is 93. And he said, "Well, I'm going to send you some documents over the internet and show them to your dad." And I said, "Well, I got to go home and get the internet. I didn't even have it." So I went home and I got AOL dial-up in Northern Virginia and everything. And he sent me the MJ12 files. And I did some research, and I read about Stanton Friedman, and he thought they were probably real, most of them and everything. And I thought, this is, holy shit, what is this? So I printed them out. And I showed him to my dad one night. And he said, "Wow, this is interesting. Let me borrow these for a while." So I said, "Sure, go ahead, knock yourself out." And a couple months later, I said, "Hey, what about those documents?" He said, "Oh, well, the Pentagon and the FBI tell me they're all a hoax." Then, back to whatever we were, watching on TV. And I said, whoa, 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 whoa. What's going on? What do you think is going on? And, I think I probably asked him about Bobby Ray Inman and all this Roswell stuff. And he said, it's a hoax, it's a hoax. And I said, well, what do you think personally? It's father to son, because he's, we're very close. And I kept pressing him on it. And because I know my dad better than anyone. And I said, Dad, don't give me this political runaround like you give. I'm not one of your constituents. I'm your son. And I kept harassing him about it. And finally he said, son, just leave it alone. Don't go down that road. And I said, fuck me. Are you serious? This is true? This is real? He's like, I can't, I don't know anything about these documents, but this is national security stuff. I know a little bit about it, but it's, not much, but you need to just leave it alone. He'd always tell me to live my life and enjoy myself. I said, Dad, how the hell can I live my life and enjoy myself when this is the truth of our world? And I had a very small body of knowledge at that point, 93. I was 31. But I was a very young, naive 31. I really was. If anything, everybody was stupid and naive, it was me. I admit that. All I cared about was how cold the beer was, how fast my race car could go, how many pretty women I could date, things like that, and hanging out with my friends and, doing not much of anything else. But this got my attention. And so I didn't talk about it, and I may have talked about it to my best friend or two, and they just wouldn't have anything. They were like,
oh, really?
You're just shooting us, you're a creative guy, you got this great imagination, ha, ha, ha. And I started to realize that no one wanted to talk about this. It's not as if people aren't interested, it's they don't want to past a certain point. If you start messing with people's hard floor of reality, you will get pushed back. I don't care if it's your family members. They'll take a baseball bat to your head every day, I don't want to know. And so, this gets to a point that I wanted to make, is that I feel as culpable about the situation as my father, because I knew about this stuff in 1993 and I didn't do anything about it, really. I did a little more research after that. I've heard of Richard Dolan, Stephen Greer, and maybe Alex Collier doing some, really wild stuff. And I started to become more interested in it. I don't have proof of anything. I'm not here to convince anybody of anything. People should think for themselves. But, I want to make that clear. I don't have super secret documents. I've seen a lot of documents, but people are like, where are the documents of something? And it's like, those are black words on white paper,
right?
That anyone could fake. So documents, Stephen Greer says, I got 10,000 documents. It's like, well, why don't you release them? Not that they're going to convince any. It's like the Admiral Wilson documents. Everyone made a big stink of that in the disclosure movement. But it's just another story. The naval officers wouldn't confirm it. I think they're true, but so what? There's no way to authenticate anything. Greer's always into authenticating documents. And I said, Stephen, who's leaning over the shoulder of the people authenticating?
I want to circle back on something real quick, because you mentioned in your emails to John Luke that Paul Mellon helped fund the CIA, NASA, and NSA, and that he, alongside Nelson Rockefeller and Allen Dulles, were members of the CFR and Jason societies. Now, this is where my knowledge falls short, so I was just wondering if you could tell us what the CFR and Jason societies are.
Well, people can look it up for themselves, but basically, if you're a member of the CFR, the Council of Foreign Relations, another one is the Bilderberger Group that everyone loves to trash, and rightly so. Prince Bernhard was in the SS, founding member. The Jason Society, the Trilateral Commission. These are globalist, financial roundtables, and they sit around the tables and go, "Gee whiz, what should we do to this African country that needs our help?" And they're like, "Now let it starve for 10 years, then we'll bring in help." These are people that don't care about, I don't care what their public press says. You're not a nice person if you're on these roundtables, these secret roundtables. I mean, they don't publish. But I know it's public. My grandfather's on the CFR. I sent you that CIA document that says, "Hey, this is Alan Dulles. Hey, man, I'll see you there, at 6 p.m. in New York." If Alan Dulles is your bud, your best bud going to the CFR, these guys, don't care about anything but secrecy in themselves. Rockefeller, the Mellons, you name it, they all gave money because in the late 40s, early 50s, they didn't want to, Congress was strapped for cash. They didn't want to create a new intelligence service or the NSA. The NSA was secret for 30 years. So was the National Reconnaissance Office. They were all created in the early 50s. No one ever knew about them. But, they tapped these, committee of 300 families and whoever had big bucks and said, your nation needs you, wave the flag and we need support. And they're like, hell yeah, all you want. And this gets into banking fraud and look at Wall Street today, derivatives and hedge funds, big foundations, they all funnel money into the military industrial complex, the deep state, the intelligence services on the down low. And I'll refer to, you and all your fans, to Catherine Austin Fitz, the Solari report. She's, she used to be the HUD chairman under Bush. So she's drilled down on all this financial stuff. It's uncomfortable history.
Yeah.
But, because Chris Mellon is public and all this stuff in the last 4 years, here I am, because I'm not gonna stay silent. My wife and I talked about it for years, but if they're going to lie to the American public by omission or otherwise, the thing with Chris is the impression that the American people have, I don't know about the rest of the world, but the American people have, is he speaks for the Mellon family. He does not. I have 4 other members of the Mellon family, maybe 5, who are, somewhat awake to some of this stuff. But none of us, he doesn't speak for us. So everyone thinks that these families are all in cahoots with each other. 90% of these people are just really boring, nice people who only want to talk about yachts and trips and, oh, gee whiz, a little philosophy here and there. They don't, you don't talk about this stuff in polite society at the table, or in the bar, it's the 5% or I have the Warner 10% rule. It's the 10% of these ultra conservative people that are involved with the financial system or, the law or, whatever, or into aerospace and other things like that. Like my uncle, Tim Mellon, Pan Am Systems. He's a military contractor. He told me that, there's nothing to hide. He's proud of it, but he's, quadrupled his fortune over the decades. I think he's like 79 or 8 now. The Mellon family is deep yogurt with all this stuff. It's a fact. The reason I think that Andrew Mellon donated a National Gallery of Art on Constitution Avenue and Paul Mellon donated the East Wing of the National Gallery of Art is because these are great things to do for the American people. I'm proud of them for that, but nothing else. America will put a gold wreath over your head. I was at 2 ceremonies with Paul Mellon, white tie and tails, and he got a medal from Reagan, at this big dinner at the National Gallery. Reagan was there, and hey, Paul, awesome, And then later on, when I think he got the National Award of Freedom or one of those awards for being a good Samaritan American. And I sat next to Vice President Bush the whole time. I don't get a good feeling about him either. Or any of the Bushes. I met his, George Bush II and Cheney and Rumsfeld when in the Oval Office when they named the submarine after my dad, the USS John Warner. These people don't give me a good feeling. And I didn't quite understand at the time the concept of the higher self and your gut intuition, and the horse sense, they call it in Virginia, your horse sense. These are things people, the sixth sense, should really understand, as everyone has it. Everyone's psychic to a degree, every single person. to a degree, and to trust that implicitly. Because that took me a long time. I would always go to other people. I wonder, what's going on with the world, but learn to trust yourself.
Yeah.
And when I started doing that, doing the shadow work, the dark night of the soul, which helps, I have a bloodthirsty side. I admit it, but I'm doing everything I can to balance that out with my good side. And, until you do that, a lot of this just sounds like gobbledygook and crazy conspiracy theories.
No, I agree with you. I mean, one thing that I would take from that as absolutely solid advice is to trust your gut. And more often these days, I've tried to be intuitively guided, and it's what led to me creating this platform and being involved in the subject that I'm involved in now. I mean, I'm 26 years old now, and I've only really been doing this for a few years, especially with the YouTube channel. Really, in terms of seriously doing it, only about a year and a half. But within this time, I've really tried to trust my intuition, and it has been the most rewarding time. It has yielded the most results when I've actually gone with my gut and said, all right, I'm not going to have plan A to Z and think about everything in the future. I'm just going to go with the flow and see what happens, and trust my instincts. And yeah, that's been definitely the most rewarding and interesting period of my life so far, is all these things rushed in to meet me from that. So no, I absolutely agree with you in that regard. Kind of speaking about things like that, intuition and also synchronicities, just want to rewind back to something about Carl Jung, because this was something that you mentioned in again one of your emails to my colleague Jean. You mentioned that Carl Jung told the Majestic 12 group in 1948 that the Foo Fighter issue was worse than they thought. You quote Carl Jung to have said in relation to the Foo Fighters, the rudder might be taken from our grasp. Now, you added on to this that you believe the rudder was stolen from us around the time of the fall of Atlantis, finishing off by saying to Jean that he should look up the German Hall of Atlantis, which was built by the Nazis. What do you see as the tangible... Say again?
It's in Bremen, Germany.
In Bremen, Germany. So what do you see as the tangible connection between the German Nazi Party and the great lost city of Atlantis?
Well, let me answer your first... Let me answer your first question.
Please.
Carl Jung, the story is he briefed MJ-12. I don't know what year, but probably in 47 when Truman was just shitting bricks over all this Foo Fighter stuff. And of course, Wild Bill Donovan reported to Roosevelt, and so did Jimmy Doolittle. I believe the story that FDR had the interplanetary unit all through the war, and Jimmy Doolittle was in charge of it. The Germans thought the Foo Fighters were ours. The English thought they were the Germans, and everybody was like, what's going on? These giant, intelligently controlled balls of plasma that seem to be some type of probe. And I write about this in a chapter in my new book, the sequel to Little Anton. And there's a scene with General Marshall, Churchill, and FDR, and it's a true story, but I put all that in there. And so what I think was going on was they tapped Carl Jung and they said, look, this special committee, the group, they call them, Forstall and Donovan said, go brief them on what you think. And he went in there, probably Carl Jung, and said, look, we're dealing with stuff that Rudolf Steiner and Gurdjieff and Blavatsky and all these philosophers and the Sufis, the secret societies, have been talking about for millennia. And you can imagine these generals and scientists and everybody in MJ-12 going, oh shit, are you kidding me? No. And he said, there's a quote, and if I have the full quote somewhere, but basically, if you tell the public, we might have the whole rudder removed from our grasp. It's something like that.
Right.
And that is a public quote of Carl Jung's, but I think he said it to MJ-12 first. He said, you better start making deals. I think the Germans have been making deals for a lot longer than you have. I think they have advisors on how to use all their new technology. And they were like, because we were way behind the Germans. Don't let the history books or the movies tell you that. We were way behind. There's very good evidence to suggest the Germans had a working atomic device by 44 in October. But look at all the high casualties on the Russian front. I think Putin came out with 27 million recently. Other historians I've talked to in Russia of the email, they're like, oh no, it's got to be around 30. or more. Now, how did the Russians lose masses, millions of people, with the Germans using conventional weapons? And the answer is you just can't. And so, that highly suggests they had weapons of mass destruction. The barrage rockets, they might have had, I think it's almost been proven, not quite, that they had thermobaric fuel air bombs, which is like a mini tactical nuke. You fire them en masse. That will do huge casualties. And those big railway guns like Dora and Gustav, they never made any sense. Historians were like, that's Hitler's ego run amok. However, those could lob a 2,000-pound, the biggest one could lob a 2,000-pound shell 26 miles. Wouldn't that make sense for a very crude uranium or even thorium device? They blew up a hell of a big ammunition bunker at Sebastopol in 1942. Von Manstein was in charge of all that operation, General von Manstein. He's also a character in Little Anton. He's B's, cousin, which a lot of these British, aristocracy, they were cousins with Prussian aristocrats, Prince Albert. But, that strongly suggests that the Germans didn't just build things out of ego. Hitler had a big ego, there's no doubt about that. But they had big railway guns in World War I. They sort of did a job. But that doesn't make sense to build a dual railway track for a giant, massive gun that could lob a shell 26 miles. But it does if you have exotic ordnance. So the Germans, the SS was well known for going all over Europe and the Middle East for thorium. And I get into this in my book that I'm writing now. That's public knowledge if you know where to look. And much more than they needed for an atomic program. So thorium is said to be a key element in all the Nazi Bell free energy experiments, Project Kronos and Cinnabar, the Red Mercury. Again, IG Farben, the Buna rubber factory at Auschwitz, they never really made any rubber. What were they up to? You have to, it's a million pieces to put together. It's very difficult.
I guess the burning question for a lot of people would be that, if they did have this incredible advancement ahead of the Allied forces, how did they lose?
I agree with Joseph P. Farrell. I've read all of his books and others. And the consensus is the Allies kind of won, sort of. Yeah, they won. The German state surrendered under General Jodl, but no Nazi party official ever signed off on a surrender.
Right.
I believe that Hitler left the bunker and made it to Argentina. I don't think he lived very long. He was a broken man. He was on a cocktail of harsh drugs, and he was a madman. Probably had other issues going on, maybe Parkinson's with the handshake. No one's quite sure. There's no autopsy. But, no Nazi party official. We know about the rat line through the Vatican and through Spain and into the U-boats and freighters and off to Argentina. And, there are stories about Antarctica. They definitely went to Antarctica a lot, the Germans, since 1915. Everyone knows about the 39-38 expedition, which Rudolf Hess and Goering signed off on. They were like, hey, go there, go find ruins of Atlantis or something. That's the story. The SS were certainly involved in all that stuff because they knew it contained ancient technology, probably. These stories sound fantastical until you start piecing the big picture together. And it took me 30 years to do that. It's not easy at all. It's not meant to be easy. When the Russian and Polish archives started opening them, and this is where Nick Cook found his information and Igor Witowski on the Wunderwaffe. That was astounding. We may never have learned, because in America we have the worst cover-up of all that World War II information. I went to the NASA archives in Maryland and, trying to find stuff about Hans Kammler and everything, and there's just one page. Oh, he was a contractor. And, everything's redacted.
Right.
Yes, my dad and I have done multiple FOIA requests on Paul Mellon. I've heard from all kinds of people he has probably around 10,000 pages of OSS documents from the war. What's so secret about World War II that they refuse? And they refused my dad, who is, had a high-level clearance. So what are they hiding?
Well, you know, it's funny
a lot of the
because
stuff I'm talking about. I think.
I'd like to gauge your opinion on this, because Tom DeLonge said that he was told that World War II was an extraterrestrial war fought by humans. Would you agree with that?
I think there's good evidence to suggest that. If you go back in time, I think a lot of wars are proxy wars. The battle in the religious text between light and darkness, angels and demons. I mean, it's fairly clear. The Earth has been Grand Central Station for probably 12 billion years. I don't believe the 4 billion. I have reason to believe that, but that's a long story. But it's much older than we're taught. History is a lie written by the winners. That I can tell you for sure. You know, I mean, it's ridiculous how the history books have been redacted and everything. And you know, all the books on Hitler are written by MI6, you know, guys like Hugh Trevor Roper. You know, I mean, it's ridiculous, the history we're taught. And that's really what got me on this road was, you know, everything is a lie. So, yeah, I think that throughout history, every war, there are people with skin in the game. You know, if you get over that leap of faith, you know, that hump, I call it, you know, of disbelief, get over that. It's like, look, you know, Earth is a war prize. It's a garden planet. It's a school of hard knocks for the metaphysical learning curves, you know, your higher self, your past lives, incarnations. It's this many things, but it's a special place. And I think there's a reason we have 12 strands of DNA. I think that's on purpose. Apparently that's unique. I don't know if it's unique in our galaxy or the universe, but it's said to be unique. And so, yeah, we are I think, we're the product of 22 different experiments back in the day before the Great Flood. Not just the Anunnaki, but, you know, 21 other ET races were like, hey, this sounds great, you know. And, you know, some people came to Earth, you know, 100,000 years ago, and they're like, hey, let's do the llama. You know, let's create a hybrid llama and do the tulips in the Amazon, you know, or the orchids in the Amazon. They're like, yeah, that's great. You know, and they hang out for a couple thousand years or a couple hundred years. They're like, oh, this was cool. We'll come back later. And they just split. They split town. And so, you know, all the megaliths all over the world, the pyramids, everything, you know, these were high civilizations all throughout history. And by all accounts, Atlantis was, man, people were coming and going all the time. People with different skin colors and this, that, and the other, people really tall, really short, you know. It's all there in the legends and history books. It all makes sense. But there was always wars. Always. You know, Lemuria and Atlantis were said to be at war. Atlantis had wars with the sons of Belial versus the children of the law of one. You know, I'm a devotee of Hermetic law and the law of one. That makes sense to me. We're all one in the cosmos. Attack somebody, you're attacking yourself. You know, it's good luck trying to get, you know, generals and admirals on board with that. You know, hey, can I read from you from the Hermetica? Get away from me. You know, it's fairly obvious once you've done the big picture work. That's what my specialty is. I'm not one of these gurus who has you know, one of the messiahs in the UFO world, you know, the big people like Greer and others. You know, I don't, you know, I take everyone's perspective into consideration. So I cast a huge net as wide as I possibly can. You know, and in the UFO community, it has its own caste system. Oh, I don't believe those people. You know, it's self-fractured. It's got compartmentalization and factions of its own. And that's why I came out and did an interview with my friend Eric Hecker, who's an ex-US Navy guy who's in Antarctica. He and I have some things in common. And he thinks he's part of this covert secret space program and possibly the super soldier program. And those people get no love in the disclosure community. They're the pariahs. Everyone just shits on them. And it's like, they deserve a voice.
Well, actually, that leads into something I wanted to ask you, because one person that you've mentioned in some of your interviews is Laura Eisenhower, the great-granddaughter of President Dwight Eisenhower. Now, as you pretty much just said, within the UFO community, people like this, and especially specifically Laura Eisenhower, has been widely dismissed. People are very quick to say that she should not be taken seriously. I, like you, try to maintain an open mind, but what would you say to those within the UFO community who dismiss the opinions and claims of people like Laura Eisenhower?
I don't lecture anyone. I tell people, trust your own mind, think for yourself. But I think everyone's deserves to be listened to, considered, their stories, their wisdom, knowledge. I think it's important to do that. People can discern the law of discernment, which is a Hermetic law. You have to discern all this stuff for yourself. The entire disclosure movement, that's a very personal thing to everyone. And so I think Laura's stories are worth a lot of consideration. As far as I know, I could be wrong, but she, myself, and Chris are the only committee of 300 family members involved in the disclosure. I don't know of anyone else. Maybe someone out there can say, oh, I know somebody, a Rockefeller or somebody. I think Lawrence Rockefeller was.
Yeah, he was involved with Greer.
And that was that whole shit show with Podesta.
Yeah, got the Clintons involved and things like that.
Oh no, that was a shit show. And it's not Greer's fault, but I believe Greer, that they told him to shut up and it's none of your business. And Greer stood up and says, it's my business. I live on this planet. I have to live with everyone. Law of one. And so, but the black hats in the room, deep state folks, they didn't want this and none of this to come out. And so, that's, to my knowledge, that's all. The three of us, I could be wrong. I really don't know. I know I have 4 family members who are kind of, sort of interested in all this, but from more of a spiritual, Carl Jung, Atlantis kind of mystical side of it. I'm more a hardcore military historian. I like to, that's where the space where I come from. But I try to read a lot of philosophy and metaphysics because none of this is going to make sense. That's my other gentle advice to everyone is if you don't understand the metaphysics and philosophy that all these people were talking about through the ages, you're not going to really get the big picture understanding. The horror of it all will overwhelm you. I mean, people say, well, Warner's crazy. Even my friends are like, he's insane, but we love him anyway. It's like, I have lost part of my sanity. Yeah, you damn Skippy, I have. Anyone would. We're human beings. We're really creatures of love, forgiveness, and understanding and community, not these, look at the ancients. I mean, we weren't created as this warrior race. I think we've been manipulated to become warriors, and we're good at it. We don't have by all accounts, we don't have a good reputation out in the galaxy. And people are like, oh, Earth humans, hands off. These guys.
This is, it's something that I've said as well, is that we're so far out of equilibrium with science and spirituality, physics, metaphysics. It's kind of like our technological progress is up here, and then our spiritual and empathetic and philosophical progress is all the way down there. And we need to be operating at some level of symbiosis between these two things. And I do worry, especially as a young man looking forward into the projection of where we're heading, as a very technocratic species, whether or not we are too far gone to reclaim that spirituality. Personally, my only real hope is that through the medium of technology, quantum mechanics, quantum computing, all of these new emergent studies and mediums, that we might be able to regain some level of spirituality through a scientific paradigm, because it just kind of feels like we're never going to go back to kind of tribal nature, drinking ayahuasca in the middle of a jungle somewhere. Like as a general species, that's probably not the projection, probably not the direction we're heading in. But I have to feel like there's some level of hope that we can still regain that conscious aspect of our being, but maybe it will happen through some sort of scientific technological revolution that brings consciousness back into the conversation. What do you think?
Yes, but the technology that is in the deep state and the military industrial complex and all that, the corporations, military contractors, that's all really neat stuff. We're probably out in the galaxy with a space fleet. Secret secret space program is most likely real. That's why they created the Space Force. Why did Trump pass the space mining bill? These are all things you need to consider to sort of put this whole puzzle together. And it's impossible to put the whole puzzle together, but you can try. I've tried. Spirituality and our ascension to higher levels of dimensionality, and that is probably our destiny. I think the people that creating hybrid races is no big deal. That's a lot of people are like that. We breed horses and dogs that way. Big deal. Everyone's a hybrid. Basically, out there, here, everywhere. The spirituality that we have, I think, is growing. The Great Awakening is happening. I've seen progress over 30 years. My wife and I have had incidents of synchronicity all the time. I had my friends' high school kids come up to me and they said, what do you think about the secret space program stuff? And I said, well, think for yourself, and it's a possibility we have to contend with. And so there are people waking up, and it has to be, the spiritual component of that is innate within us. So I've become more spiritual. I'm not a religious person. I didn't believe in any of that. I think religions are, somewhat artificial. They have a lot of wisdom and history in them, but there's so much disinformation. I think that probably, they created religions, whoever the controllers of the world in ancient times were like, oh, we need religions. By all accounts, the Anunnaki created it. They had a caste system, the Anunnaki kings. The lighter skinned people tended to the bedchambers and temples and kitchens. The brown people were the warriors and did some other chores. And then the darker skinned people did the hard, brutal work in the fields. And you could look that up. And these people that, that are our slaves, they need religions, something that, worship us as gods. But then it became, by the Roman times, the monotheism became the cult of, solar cults, Mithraism, these all dovetailed into Christianity. And Constantine and the people in Istanbul, which is, back then it was Constantinople, they probably burned the Library of Alexandria and the Library of Apollo in Rome and said, oh no, we're gonna, were there some ETs involved in that? Probably, they probably look like us. I don't know, who they were, but I strongly feel the Anunnaki were. No, they never left. Everyone's like, oh, the Anunnaki left. No. I had an admiral once tell me that ETs, I said to the Anunnaki, and he's like, well, I can't speak to that, but ETs walk the halls of the Pentagon every damn day. Every goddamn day, he said.
Can you say which admiral that was, or?
No, I'm not going to go there. But, that was probably, 2000, 2002, somewhere in there. And I was like, yeah, I believe that. It's not this big deal everyone thinks it is. Oh my gosh, us versus them. We are all equal citizens of the cosmos. I truly believe that. Law of one, Hermetic law, you get into all that philosophy. But it's, we're all different. And so, I think ETs out there, by all accounts, they're very neutral. They're like, that's just a perspective. Good and evil, yin and yang. Our duality as human beings. I mean, I struggle with my duality every day. And this is like, everyone's like, it's the people versus the royals and the 300 families and the deep state and the military. No. A lot of those people believe in what I'm talking about. They're just caught with, national security contracts and death threats. I've talked to some of these people. They're like, I wish I could do more, but they will, I remember one congressman said, look up the wood chipper scenario. This is in the 90s, I think. I said, what the fuck is that? And I talked to some of my intelligence people, and they're like, yeah, when senators and congressmen, I don't know about today, but back then, the 90s and before that, they said if they dare interest themselves into, the black programs, unacknowledged special access programs, and they get too nosy, they're shown the wood chipper. You know, they come in the middle of the night, they put a bag over your head, inject you with something, take you out to some farm, and they, you know, there's 10 of you in a line, and then they take the poor asshole down the end of the line, they put him through the wood chipper, and they smash everyone's face into bloody goo. And said, you will not interest yourselves in our business anymore. You will toe the line.
You've been told that's something that actually was told to you is real? That happened?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
My dad and I was discussing. He said, you know, it's a tough world, son. You know, I don't care how much money people have. I don't care if you're a billionaire. You cannot shield yourselves from the horrors of the world. Once you wake up to it, you're still beholden to, you know, illness and depression and everything. You know, there's no, you know, once you're starting to piece all this together and you're awake, there's no going back. You know, my dad did a great thing. He took me with him all around the world, and he didn't want me to be some rich candy ass kid. You know, he always said, "Gotta work." I was always a workaholic like him. I always had a job. I was always doing something. I didn't want to be like the kids at the yacht club or the young people, you know, who only talk about yachts and golf and tennis and, you know, maybe, you know, how beautiful, you know, the Queen's dress was that day at Ascot. You know, that's what these people talk about. You just don't talk about deep things. Most of them are just oblivious to everything. It's like what I wrote Jean-Luc, you know, they're asleep at the switch on the yacht. Oh, I have to varnish my yacht. You know, which color do you like? My God, I had a funny story. I was at the yacht club in Cape Cod one year before they threw me out. Dress code violations, cussing. You know, I was not the sort. But I was married to another woman.
You were too fun.
Right, I'm married to my ex-wife, and she said, "Oh no, we have to be members of the yacht club." And you know, so I was up there at Cape Cod, and this group of my friends were with some group of golfers, and they said, "My God, how can you be into all this conspiracy theories and UFOs? Why can't you be like the rest of us and play golf and learn to, you know, do hedge fund stuff and fuck over the small people of the world?" You know, basically. And I said, you know, I liked to play tennis back then. It was actually good for your timing, but I hated golf. I think it's a stupid game. You know, men doing business deals and the deep state guys going, "Oh, we should, you know, implement this anti-gravity craft in Afghanistan," all while playing golf. And I said, you know, so they started laughing at me and everything, and you know, I'm always the butt of the joke. I'm like, that's fine. And then I went up to him. I said, "Tell me if I'm wrong. Golf, you use it takes one ball in golf." And they're like, "Yes, of course." And I'm like, as far as I know, being a pro racer, it takes two. So that shut him up. So I have little time for these snotty people who don't do any deep thinking or don't think for themselves. And I'm not saying that's everyone's fault, but people by and large are willfully ignorant. I had another friend, a close friend, recently. He said, "I'm sure you're right about some of this stuff, you know, but I don't want to know. Ignorance is bliss." And I said, "All right, buddy, ignorance is bliss, huh? Well, ignorance is stupid, being stupid and arrogant, and that the bliss is temporary. So what good is it?" He's like, "I don't care." You know, slugs down 10 whiskeys. You know, people are willfully ignorant, and that's what, you know, you can't red pill people. They have to be in the process themselves. And this gets into soul contracts and metaphysics and reincarnational lives. You know, the tick the option boxes like you're at a car dealership. Oh, what should I do in this next life? Oh, I want to do this and this. And I could see myself checking all the boxes. And, you know, oh, yeah, I want a spine full of titanium. And, oh, I want to go through all that, you know. But other people are like, nah, I'm going to hang out in the Bahamas and read books and drink rum drinks. But
freedom of will, yeah.
Right. But they're still doing their jobs if they incarnate on Earth, according to all the philosophers and everybody, because you are of the light, unless you want to be, you know, in the darkness, which is totally fine. You know, go do your thing, Mr. Hitler and, you know, Stalin. But if you want to just hang out, you know, you're still doing your job at sort of raising the vibration of the planet. You know, our heart chakras are connected to Mother Earth. And so that's kind of, it gets into why Earth has been this very popular place for people to come and conquer and war and, and do all this thing is because as human beings, we have a very powerful heart chakra that's connected to Mother Earth. Now, that's something you can drill down on in metaphysics, but I'm trying to do better. I can't just, Nazi anti-gravity weapons with atomic. You can't just do that. You have to understand that side of it. So, all the pretty women on YouTube doing, here's what we do today at our heart chakras and crystals. And that's all very important stuff. But it's not my purview per se, But I tried to understand it and consider it. I was like, all these crystal hippies, God damn it, they're idiots. And then I'm like, whoops, they've got a point. Because all this high tech in the military industrial complex, it is crystal based. I don't know if you've heard of the rectangle they found on one of these crashed UFOs sometime. I think it was 40, 50 years ago. And they couldn't figure out what it was, and they put it on a shelf. And then one day some clever guy was like attached something to it to do a power drain. And it was like, woo, the whole building lit up. And this thing is a free energy device that's this small.
Yeah, I think that's the one that Stephen Greer mentioned.
Yeah, it's all crystal. It's all crystal-based technology. And so this gets into the vacuum of space-time and torsion fields and all that good stuff. And I wanted, as far as the Sufi wisdom and Gurdjieff, George Gurdjieff, what he found was very interesting in his books when he went to visit the Sarmoon in Afghanistan. And that was the whirling dervishes. And I write about this in my new book. The whirling dervishes, somehow that Sufism mystery school figured out, if we can train ourselves to dance for 24 hours or whatever it is without getting sick or dizzy, and it takes years, a lifetime to develop, they create a torsion field in the brain. And so that allows the pineal gland to activate through what Rudolf Steiner and everyone is calling the eighth sphere of reality, which is our false control system on the planet, which has to exist because there's no way they can get away with all this stuff for thousands of years without it. It's just logic. And so, I've got my character Beatrice, and she's, fighting a war. She's like, George Gurdjieff comes to her in a microsecond and says, whirling dervish, you idiot. And so she applies that. She's kind of a fuck up and an idiot, but she applies that. And they were able, it's a high performance meditation. And so they're dancing in front of all the kings and the potentates throughout history, these whirling dervishes, but they're connecting with the universal consciousness. Ha ha ha! Guess what we're doing? And so they found a way around. There's always a workaround in life. I think in the universe, there's always a workaround. Oh, we got a problem. It's impossible. The word impossible was probably given to us by some nefarious group. It doesn't have, nothing is impossible in the universe. Even my O&I friend, when we talk about stuff, he's like, yeah, everything's possible. There's no impossibility of anything, which is why it's so sad to see everyone arguing in the disclosure movement. They're at each other's throats. You guys found me. I really wasn't going to come out to anybody, but Jean-Luc and I shoot the breeze. And I thought, oh, this is synchronicity. I'm going to go with this. And my wife and I had talked about it for a long time. Because, I'm nobody really important in the scheme of things, but, I just have a weird family story to tell in conjunction with all this new knowledge.
Well, I have to admit that, and I've said this in our 3-part series, and for everyone listening, by the way, I'll link that in the description box below. So if you haven't checked that out, I'd recommend checking that out because we do go through quite a lot of different things regarding your book and obviously the emails you sent. But that's something that I was, I've completely forgotten my train of thought then. I had a really nice point that I wanted to nail down, and it's just
psychically connect with you. Oh, there you go.
Oh, what were you saying?
I don't know, something about the emails of Jean-Luc.
No, you were saying something.
Luke Picard of Star Trek. I'm not sure.
I have completely forgotten. Or maybe, all right, I'm going to try and remember it. But what I would like to segue into just real quick, especially just in regards to kind of present day discussions.
I'm listening.
Yep, no worries. Because a tangible connection to the modern day UFO or UAP transparency efforts is your third cousin, the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, Christopher Mellon. Now, Chris played an integral role in the dislodging and dissemination of the now famous Navy videos that captured the unidentified aerial phenomena during naval training exercises. He's worked with the New York Times in order to push this information out into the mainstream, and he was a member of Tudor Star's Academy of Arts and Science. He's since left his role within TTSA, and we can get into some of the possible reasons for that in a moment. But first of all, you've called him a dear friend, so is it fair to say that you and Christopher are close?
We're not super close, but we've known each other. We went to camp together in 1973, so we've known each other for a long time. And I would see him here and there. I knew his brother, who's now passed away, Matthew, a little better. Yeah, I mean, Chris and I have had conversations. He came to my farm. We had a great 5-hour conversation over a couple of scotches, you know. And I know his family. I went to the Mellon reunion a few years ago with my wife. There she is. Come say hi to Jay.
Hey Jay, how are you?
Hey, how you doing?
There's the brains of the operation right there. She's smarter than I am. Always good to have a spouse or you know, a wife that's smarter than you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's my gentle advice to you as a young man.
I'm just here to support him. There you go.
You're up till 1 in the morning discussing all this.
Lovely to see you.
Don't tell him our secrets. So
no.
Well, nice meeting you anyway.
Yeah, you
she
too.
met Chris. I mean, here's the thing. My dad and Stephen Greer with his comment about my father, and Chris Mellon coming forward with Lou Elizondo publicly 4 years ago. That made disclosure my business. You know, my wife and I are very private people. We like to mingle with all kinds of people. I enjoy, we have a pretty quiet life, really. And I like Chris. You know, I've met his family. He's a great family man. My opinion, and I don't know Lou Elizondo, but my friend Captain Daniel Cross, you know, retired. He knows Lou, and so we had a good conversation about Lou. And so, my opinion is they are on the opposite end of. They are in the disclosure movement because they brought this topic alive. It was completely dead. No one was really listening to anything about UFOs, not in the mainstream public. And all of a sudden, in 2017, they brought that footage out. And so Chris continues to write articles in the Washington Post or the Times, you know, New York Times or the Hill and wherever else. And they keep that on the boil. So I commend them for that. I really do. And I told Chris that. And, you know, our conversation is private, but what I can tell you is that, you know, he's like, oh, you and Tom DeLonge are into the wild stuff. And I said, I don't know Tom DeLonge. You know, he seems like a nice guy. His heart's in the right place. You know, I don't know about the skateboard thing, but whatever, man. You know, and I said, such an odd choice for all you know, Jim Semivan, Hal Puthoff, and, you know, all these guys who are, you know, insiders and spooks and you know. And he's like, oh, well, he was our front man, and we're trying to get the youth of, you know, younger people involved and, you know, trying to lighten up their image of this thing. And I said, I can understand that. It's still really a goofy thing. Why didn't you call me? And I could have advised you on something a little different. But, you know, I'm like, Chris, if you don't understand some of the wild stuff, why are you with Tom DeLonge? And he's talking about the wild stuff. And I think, you know, he's their front man. You know, a lot of the disparaging people will call him a useful idiot, which is an intel term. I don't know about that. I don't know Tom. I've never met him, but you know, his Freemasonic symbols on his guitar and other things. You know, his book with Peter Levenda, The Secret Machines, that was very mild stuff. My books hit the nail really hard. I mean, I don't hold back. That's just me. So, you know, I sat down and I explained how a black triangle, the TR3B or the new G model, you know, these are old stuff from the 80s that we have flying around, and they're going to soon let that out in Space Force as part of low-level disclosure.
Have you been told that?
Yeah. No big deal. Anti-gravity. It's not that hard once you know the trick. And people invent anti-gravity toys all the time on YouTube, and then they get a knock on the door and say, well, Boeing owns the patents to free energy, buddy. It's an inside joke. All the insiders are laughing, everybody. We're still debating anti-gravity. It's like ridiculous. And the ancients had it. We've probably always had it on Earth in one form or another. It's not that big a deal. The big deal is what constitutes the wild stuff that Chris and I were talking about. And I sat down, I drew him the TR3B. Here's the plasma ring, it's carbon fiber, titanium, the maneuvering nodes are, there's hexagonal sacred geometry in there. And, the maneuvering nodes use a powdered quartz and ballistic glass, with monotonic gold on one side and lead insulator, and they do high voltage. You get a torsion field on 3 nodes, and it maneuvers beautifully. 7 minutes from ground level to the moon. Big deal. This is not the big deal stuff. The hardware that everyone, American Airlines, we saw a UFO the other day. It was shaped like a hot dog with mustard. The hardware is not an issue. It's what are they, Chris and Lou are gatekeepers. And I said, man, I know you're on a short leash. I didn't mean that as a disparaging comment. I said, I know you're beholden to national security stuff, but come on. Even if 5% of the wild stuff, the dark stuff, the wild stuff is true, it's astounding. But it's also horrifying because you got my labs and abductions and, all these people are insane. I was abducted, all these grays, and there was a mantid being and a German, in a black leather coat. Barney and Betty Hill said that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's ridiculous that we're still talking about this childish shit. And he's like, oh no, we got up, the American people will panic. American people will panic. And I said, I've gotten to know a lot of American people, blue collar, middle class, rich people. It doesn't matter. The American people aren't stupid. They may be ignorant by design, but they're not stupid. Yeah, a lot of people will panic and freak out, their religious beliefs and everything like that will be challenged. No, look at 9/11. That brought America together. Whoever was responsible for 9/11, some faction within the deep state, arguing with another faction, look what we can do if you disclose something, buddy. Something like that probably happened. American people didn't become afraid. It galvanized this country. I was down in Georgia filming a documentary film, and I remember a big dually pickup truck, exhaust stacks and twin turbos and everything. And it had a big stars and bars on the back of it, and God, guns, and country and everything like that. And it had a homemade sticker on the back that says, "We love New York." Now, as a Southerner, I can tell you that most Southern people don't like carpetbaggers, Northeast intelligentsia and New Yorkers and all the, But they did after 9/11. We were all one, except for the black hats in some faction somewhere. I saw that, and that brought me to tears. And my producer was with me. She was a wonderful Southern woman, and we brought us because she and I knew that he meant it. And he's got a gun rack with assault rifles, and and this is what the South, a lot of the people down there, they're all about: God, guns, and country, and God damn it, don't mess with us, And so that really left an impression on me. And so it's the same with UFO disclosure. The people of the world, American, I can only speak for Americans. I'm world traveled, but I don't know a lot of foreign people. I wish I did, but I know a few. By and large, people can handle this stuff. We've been through World War II, the Holocaust, Vietnam was horrifying. Missing in action. Where are the missing people? Is that related to my labs? Are people being abducted, en masse? I believe there's truth to that. So I think that's part of the wild stuff that, Chris and Lou, I appreciate what they're doing, but they're slow rolling disclosure, in my view. I don't speak for them. I speak only for myself. And while I understand they're cautionary, but this is ridiculous because the disclosure movement's moving past all that. I agree with Richard Dolan when he said that Chris Mellon and Lou They're just moving the goalposts further down the line. And so they're creating this new space of disclosure that's really not. And so, though I am friends with Chris, I disagree with his program. They are lying by omission. The Navy doesn't, it's not a mystery. The Navy knows what that is. They test secret craft all the time with the other branches of the military, and they're like, oh my God, a UFO, and it's our stuff. People are like, oh, that's impossible. They think we have a few weapons in the U.S. Space Force, and it's like, no, I believe we're way out in the galaxy. And that suggests Stargate travel and transdimensional, space travel is time travel. It's part and parcel. So DARPA, time travel stories, MK Ultra, Montauk Project, it lends credibility to that when I see this stuff, because I understand they're scared to death of all this stuff getting out, whatever the truth is.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the time travel thing. I mean, something that you mentioned in one of your emails to Jean-Luc was the TV series Dark, and how it was based on Project Montauk and the link to Brookhaven Labs, going on to say that Brookhaven was a US Air Force time tunnel testing facility. Now, I have an intelligence source who has operated on behalf of the NSA and also the National Air and Space Intelligence Center. He was also an intelligence consultant on all 3 seasons of Dark. And when I asked him if you were correct regarding Brookhaven and Project Montauk, he confirmed that you were. He also said to me a few times now that I think it was the 1950s, the supposed agreements between select members of the US military and the ET race that we call Ebens were real, that those meetings did take place, that these agreements involved the exchange of technological assets with applications in time travel. I've also been told by him that there are, to their knowledge, 3 converging human timelines, and that some of the ETs are actually human beings from separate timelines, and that the splitting of the atom was the catalyst that ushered them in, that we essentially converged with other timelines due to splitting the atom. Have you ever had that type of narrative explained to you by intelligence community folks or anyone?
I didn't need them to do that. I knew it on my own from my own research. Remember, Dr. Oppenheimer, in World War II, after they dropped the bomb on Japan, he said, I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. That's from the Vedic texts.
Yeah,
There's strong evidence in Mohenjo-Daro and in India of melted glass and melted stone from high heat explosions. And so I think it's obvious that atomic weapons have been used, sadly, all throughout human history, going way back. And so what Oppenheimer knew, and I write about this in my new book, when you let off an atomic device, it not only affects the local battlefield at hand, but it cuts through the 4th and into the 5th dimension, creating billions of additional casualties. That's why in World War II, all of a sudden the Foo Fighters, and there was increased UFO traffic and visitation, is because they were like, shit, somebody's taught the human race how to do the atomic device. And of course, the Nazi SS had the Vedic texts. I write about this too. The Kang Shur from Tibet, the Vedic texts, which are hard to decipher, but once you know some of the tricks, you can start making atomic weapons. And so that's the problem. I think Majestic 12 and Ike were told this by Oppenheimer and others. It's like, listen, every time you let off a hydrogen bomb, you're just not killing people on a Pacific island. You're killing people you can't see that live on this damn planet too.
I mean, if that's true, you think about how many tests we have done over time, like not just America, but Russia and China. Like, there's so many.
It's disgusting.
Yeah.
And I grew up in an era, I'm a baby boomer. I was born in 1962, and I had nuclear nightmares all throughout childhood. Wow. We used to do the duck and cover.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's disgusting. And, I think MJ-12 and the Black Hats and the military industrial complex just said, fuck it. We'll just do whatever we want. National security, national security, national security. We need to fight the Soviets. And the Cold War was all bullshit. On the deeper levels, we were always working with the Soviets. It's a joke. I knew that in the 80s. I was a Russian history major. My advisor was Russian. And he's like, I used to be in the military. We've been working with the Americans on the above top secret stuff on the down low, while the Cold War's fought by these generals and admirals and others that are like, oh my God, the Russians, they've invaded Afghanistan. That was all semi-real, but it was also dog and pony show,
I want to finish this off with a few questions regarding the upcoming book, Lion, Tiger, Bear, because you said that Little Anton contains disclosure within its pages, but you have also said that this is, that this is being taken over even further with Lion, Tiger, Bear. What's the overall narrative of this next book, and why do you feel it's even more explosive than Little Anton, which contains some pretty intense information? I mean, without obviously giving away too much, but what's coming with the next book?
Well, Little Anton is a very long juggernaut of a book.
It sure is.
It's too long, but just thumb through it. Thumb through the.
Oh, I'm enjoying it. Don't worry, I am very much enjoying it.
Everyone, people use it as a doorstop. My friends. I'm like, but it's and I sent you infamous chapter 108. It's really 109 in the book, but Little Anton has disclosure in a 1930s setting. So it's not all the stuff we know today. B is getting a briefing from her MI6 boss because he's a mystic and he's kind of pieced it all together, in a 1938 style version. And so Little Anton has some disclosure, but for people in the disclosure movement, it's not going to be that much. It's the other people who are just sort of coming online. But in the next book, I come right out of the starting gate. It hits you hard. It dives deeper into the occult. Much of it is very dark, but it's still funny, and there's a satire going on. B and her zany gang. But there are some very, very dark moments. And they get directly into, the Untitled SS and their work in the Middle East. And it gets more into the anti-gravity program that the Germans probably were doing. The book takes place in 1942. And so, it's not the end of the war where they were, probably experimenting by, using discs and trying to make them into weapons, which wouldn't work because the space-time bubble, the electromagnetic plasma bubble, becomes unstable if you shoot a recoil weapon. That's why we developed directed energy weapons and scalar weapons, because that's all you can use off of an anti-gravity craft. And so it gets into all that, much deeper into all that. And so it's going to be a wild ride.
Yeah, I love the way
shorter.
It's shorter, a lot shorter. Yeah, disclaimer, everyone, it's a lot shorter. But I have to admit, just talking about Little Anton real quick, I love how sneaky you are with it, because there is literally nothing on the front cover or the blurb, like the description. You pick that up from on a bookshelf, and you just be like, oh, this is about Porsche and World War II and espionage, but there's no suggestion of what you find inside the pages, which I actually think is a really clever way of doing it. And I actually remember what I forgot when I was trying to figure out what I was going to say to you before, and I completely blanked on it. What I was going to say was one of the things I really appreciated about how we found you, or how Jean found you, was that you're not advertising yourself to the UFO community. You're not on Gaia TV, going, I've got the answers, you need to read my book. It's very nuanced. You've just put it within this, book that if you picked it up off the shelf, you wouldn't really think that it was going to contain this stuff. And I think that, at least from like a ego perspective, I think that definitely speaks to your character, because you're not trying to push this out and say that you've got the answers, but you genuinely do believe this stuff. You think that this is probably the best representation of the reality around UFOs and ancient societies. And I think that's a really clever way of doing it. You've kind of sneakily put it out there.
I mean, I started writing. I had 3 back operations. I got titanium in my spine holding it together. And right around, let's see, probably 2007, I started, a friend of mine said, listen, idiot, buy a laptop, teach yourself to write, and write a book. And I said, it sounds boring. And he said, what else are you doing? You're lying around in pain, just do it. And so I did it. And I was going through, physical rehabilitation for my back and everything, and it was painful. But the interesting thing about, I haven't written anything since high school, so I think it was 48 at the time, I think, 11 years ago. And so I wrote a little bit, and I started reading Winston Churchill and writing and everything like that. I basically taught myself to write. because there was nothing else to do. I could research a little bit and read a few, interesting history books, but I always wanted to do something about World War II, and because the Grand Prix story of Germany in the 1930s, Auto Union versus Mercedes, the silver arrows, the silver fish, that was a big deal back then. Formula One today owes its roots to the Grand Prix, European Grand Prix in the 30s. And so I had this interesting, fun novel I was going to write about a girl spy, and who gets involved with Ferdinand Porsche and, that whole racing program. But I was writing the book, I was researching more into the disclosure movement and UFOs and alien life and ancient history, and I thought, I'm going to weave some of this into this book. And, my editor and I went back and forth, that's why we split it into 3 separate books. There's no way it's an epic story. So it's really 3 books in one, but I thought I'd weave some of that in there when it was appropriate. And, Porsche was into high technology and secret programs. And so it just naturally I wove it into the narrative, but I didn't think it was a big deal. I just thought, most people be interested in my book were, gearheads and racing people, I didn't think anybody was going to like it, for any of the other stuff. Who's it? What's the Anunnaki? What is this? Oh, one. What the fuck is that? My friends are like, I don't get it. I don't get it. And it's like, I have to explain. They still don't get it. But you and Jean-Luc and John do. And so you're the first people that, Jean-Luc got a hold of it and read some of it. And I sent him some chapters, some zesty chapters, and, I sort of just cobbled together a website and, did a little bit of marketing with a publicist, and, but, I don't take money for my work. I never have. Even my documentary films, I donated all that to Yellow Ribbon Fund to give all my films to the troops. Back then, 2004, I sent them to the troops. And I work with wounded veterans at my farm twice a year with a deer hunt that they do. So that's another place where I talk about Afghanistan. It's these wounded veterans that tell me about some of that stuff. They're like, I shouldn't tell you this, but, and it gets into those narratives. But I didn't really, Little Anton has a little bit of everything for everybody. Some people just like the love story. Some people like the Nazis and the occult and the SS. Some people like the racing stuff. And some people like all the above. But it's a tough read, and it's not for everyone. My editor thought, you're insane. A 1,000-page book is my first book. I said, hey man, I cut 300 pages out of it.
Oh my gosh.
It was 1,300 pages.
Wow.
And there are novels that are much longer. I mean, that's why I put it in a box set with 3 books.
Yeah, it's a beautiful box set.
People can just skim through it and read, some of the fun chapters with Bee and her girlfriends and all the silly stuff. But it's my second book. I delve deep into the Foo Fighters and FDR's programs and Doolittle and those kinds of narratives. It's World War II history. I totally believe. And the occult stuff. My character Bernie gets way into that, and they have their own sort of World War II awakening to the, a lot of the darkness, the true, history of the world and the occult, and how that weaves itself. Wars are just a mass death ritual, I believe. And Aleister Crowley's in there, because he would brief Churchill. And, so that's all interesting, for a lot of people. They're going to be like, oh, he's made all this stuff up. And I didn't actually. It's what I believe to be true.
Well, the publicly available chapter of your upcoming book, which is on your website, again, to everyone listening, links will be in the description box below. So you can go onto John's website and check out the chapter of Lion, Tiger, Bear that's available. But this one involves a closed door meeting between Winston Churchill, Franklin Roosevelt, and General George Marshall, wherein they discuss not only the real-time issues of World War II that were unraveling at that time, but they kind of proceed to delve into lost ancient history and the existence of the infamous grey alien. I have to ask if this is purely a fictional scenario, or have you been told certain things that culminated into you writing about this secret discussion between these gentlemen?
I believe it took place. They were all Freemasons.
Right.
They were 33rd degree or higher, and so they knew some of the esoteric truth of the world. Atlantis, high civilizations that were pre-Diluvian, so they had some education. I'm fully convinced of that. The word is, Forrestal witnessed a UFO crash in Missouri in 1942. There were other crashes around the United States, the 1920s, the 30s, in Germany and America, all over the world. This stuff was happening, and they were starting to try to understand this technology. The Germans were way ahead by all accounts, which is why they were so way ahead. They're good engineers and they have a lot of technical schools, but come on. I think it makes sense. They did. And so the word is Forrestal saw the crash, and he saw not only the ET bodies, but also human body parts in some sort of gel. And, he being a very religious man, he really freaked out about that. And that's why he later on was going to disclose this on his own. And of course, I think he was, pushed out of a window or jumped out himself under duress. And so Forrestal, in fact, there was a movie my wife and I just saw last night, and I recommend it to people. It's called The 11th Green.
It's fantastic film. Fantastic film.
It's a little mild for me, but it's not bad.
I just love the way they did it, because it's not like typical UFO film. It's almost like an indie art house style film, and some of the stuff that they talk about is just so interesting.
Yeah, they show the hard knocks and the pushback by military personnel that are in the deep state and others. It's like, keep quiet or we're gonna fucking kill you, and that was reality. It may still be reality for people. If you sign a national security contract, they have it says in it, they have the right to terminate with extreme prejudice. I mean, it's there. People know it, but there are people that come forward anyway. So I think the film is good. They obviously didn't tell the other parts about the Eisenhower met with 3 races of ETs. They didn't show that. They just showed the kind blind, a blonde Nordic guy, looked like Jesus or whoever. And so, this gets into holographic technology and, ET's deceptions and, contracts and agreements in the universe are taken very seriously. And so, as they are down here, you sign a contract, you honor it. And there's ways to, like the mafia, to manipulate. Here's a deal you can't refuse. And I think Ike got a Hobson's choice. We'll help you with your spirituality if you do us some favors, or we'll help you with your military technology if you do us some favors. But really, the 3 groups, I've heard they were kind of working with each other in the down low. And so he may not have had any choice at all. Whether a truly benevolent race, probably, said, we'll help you, and they were like, nah, we'll take the weapons. And so that's the United States. I mean, war and arming for war is our day job. That is the majority of the gross domestic product in this country is military. And I think our budget, our yearly budget, is in the many trillions, not the 1.5 that it's on public. And the black, the black fund that they pass in Congress, that my father passed, that's a drop in the bucket.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? People are wondering and postulating on negative ETs and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, we're pretty fucked up ourselves. Like if to other species we would be ETs, and we seem like pretty malevolent ETs to some extent.
No, I make this clear in my book that I'm writing. We are all responsible. Everyone's like sitting back in their chairs and going, "Oh, the deep state and the people, I hate them." And it's like, there are those of us who remain willfully ignorant, and we vote for these people. It's done legally. And so everyone has bloods on their hands, everyone. If you do banking, you have 500, pounds sterling in the bank, and you're earning interest on that. That's no different than a billionaire earning, untold amount of money, in their investment accounts, because you're part of this Babylonian, Sumerian money banking system. Sorry, we all are one, and we are all culpable in a sense. And then it's easy to point your fingers. This is the hard part, is that, I hate a lot of people. I really do. I'm trying not to hate anyone, but I still, these people who are really in the horrible Epstein human trafficking angle of this whole thing, those are despicable, disgusting people. But I'm telling you, if you get down to brass tacks, we are all culpable for this. I mean, they are our brothers and sisters who do this. In the law of one, our duality, you can't point fingers. They did it. It was them. You can't do that. Why is it that, one friend of mine said to me, "How do you know all this stuff?" I said, with respect, how is it that you do not know? And he just shook his head and he says, "I don't believe any of this crap you're telling." I'm like, "That's fine. But consider, and then when Chris Mellon and the Epstein was arrested, he was like, "Wow, you had a point. There are some weird things going on." So
it seems highly unlikely to me that every single shred of intelligence that's been gathered by the US government and other powerful governments and institutions will ever really be publicly disseminated. But what do you personally feel is necessary for there to be a full disclosure of the UFO issue? Is it even possible for there to be a full disclosure?
Full disclosure will only come from the ordinary people of the world. The military, industrial, intelligence, corporate complex in whatever country, they will never, ever, ever reveal the full truth. Ever. They can't. However, it is my personal view that Chris and Lou Elizondo represent a series of factions that said we've got to do something. Because there's a lot of people, they're good people in the military. It's good to, I have problems with duality myself, yin and yang. But, they want disclosure. But not all of it. They want, discussion of the secret space program and the ET visitation and things like that. But if the wild stuff, if a lot of that's true, they don't want that to ever come out, because then everyone's tainted with blood. But I'm telling you, we're all culpable, because these are our brothers, sisters, cousins, that work for these, inside. And the military personnel, we're all in there together, whether we like it or not. And so that's why, I told my wife, I said, I've got to say something. Chris and Lou are up there, saying nothing burgers, and I can't stand that. U.S. Navy knows exactly who's coming in and out of our atmosphere. This gets into my discussion with my best friend, Captain Daniel Cross. He just retired from the ONI after 30 years. And I said, I know you're under national security contract, once intel, always intel. Well, we shared a bottle of wine, a steaks. And I said, what can you tell me? I said, what about the satellites? And he said, oh, yeah, I can tell you all about that. The U.S. Air Force has their own 2-man satellites. They're manned. They're replenished by the B-2 stealth bomber because it's anti-gravitics in its wings. It's orbitable capable. And, the Navy has theirs too. And I said, well, is it neutrino tracking, scalar? And he's like, well, I can't get into the details, but we can track those bastards punching in and out superluminal anytime, day or night, and we can track them 25 miles under the earth or the ocean.
Wow.
Now, superluminal is beyond the speed of light. So I thought we were talking, the 3 holy cows of academia are, we evolved from apes. Nothing can go beyond the speed of light. Thank you, Einstein. Why? And that, matter cannot be created and destroyed. Matter can be created with consciousness. And they know that in the programs. Oh boy, that's what all this remote viewing stuff, that's bigger than people think. And so, I talked to him about that, and he's like, yeah, there's something to that. I can't talk about that. But, I started to tell him, what about all this banking fraud and the movement of drugs by Black Triangle craft, optical invisibility, the F-35 fighter and the hat trick, that's its hat trick, the optical invisibility. And he's like, yeah, but he's like, I have never heard of the drug thing. And I said, well, the CIA just came out with a Tom Cruise movie, and then it's like, ha, ha, ha. We've been, of course we are in the drug business. It's all the CIA. And he's like, well, Yeah, I can't talk about funding streams, but wink, wink. Smiling while he's cutting into a steak and drinking more wine. I'm like, have more wine. And
in vino veritas.
And then our next dinner was with Dad, and he's like, Dad's 94 now, but he's still kicking. He's like, you two got to figure out this damn UFO problem with Chris. And I'm like, I've tried. Daniel's like, I can't get involved. And so I urge Chris and Lou. They probably will never watch this, but
Well, Christopher Mellon follows me on Twitter, so he might.
Yeah. But I think their hands are tied.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I'll be very clear with my words. This is nothing personal. It's just business. But when they get up there and say, "Oh, it's all a mystery," and gosh, the Navy pilots, who knows what's out there? They're lying by omission, and that's why I'm talking with you today, because I told my wife I cannot stay silent when my cousin is out there, my friend, and he's not telling the whole truth. Maybe that was their plan. Ooh, their crazy cousin, Johnny, will come out, and him and Tom DeLonge smoke pot and get into the wild stuff. It's disclosure's never going to come from the government. Oh, the government's useless. Capitol Hill, all those idiots. They barely know anything anyway. It's only like people like my dad and certain other key members that were read in on a tiny bit of it. Not the full Monty. The full Monty's only going to come from the people. We have to demand it. And, I'm all for peaceful demonstrations. They should occupy CIA, Langley over here. And they should occupy Lockheed Martin, Boeing Defense, Sandia Labs, Los Alamos Labs. That's what people need to do. I was so proud of those people who were going to storm Area 51. But
yeah, it didn't turn out too well, but
everything's moved to Tonopah, so they'll open.
Yeah, that's true.
Heard they're going to open Area 51 and go, look, a museum. Here's one UFO. Yeah, everyone back to work, back to school. We've got it all under control. And the factions are all fighting. They always have been.
I want to thank you for taking so much time to sit down and speak with me. Honestly, I think you and I could go on for hours, but it is actually approaching midnight here, so we do need to cut this off at some point, and I think you've been extremely forthcoming. Let me just say that I would welcome you back onto my platform anytime in the future if you ever want to discuss things further, but for now, I would just like to say thank you for being here. And is there anything you want to say to those listening before we wrap this up?
I'd just like to say once more, everyone's truth is going to be different. Everyone's perspective is different. I urge people to consider everyone in this game, this field, this hobby, if you want. I believe personally that everyone has a valuable perspective. And so, all this weird esoteric stuff, and, it's all connected because everything is connected, synchronicity. All points of space and time are connected. And so, it's not easy. I'm still learning every day. Every day. I turn away a lot of information. I know it, but I want to hear people's perspective. That's why I liked you and John and John Luke. You were just shooting the breeze, but you're all really smart. And people as your age, 28, 26, you said?
26, yeah.
Shit. When I was 26, I didn't have anything on the ball. I was, just screwing around. The young people of today, I'm so impressed with them.